The city skyline glittered a backdrop of 1,000,000 untold stories. But tonight, one story was about to erupt. Inside a penthouse that scraped the heavens, a millionaire prepared to propose to his mistress, a ring nestled in velvet, promising a future built on secrets. He was oblivious to the storm gathering just floors below. His pregnant wife, a vision in a backless red gown, was ascending in the private elevator. Her heart, a symphony of betrayal and resolve. She wasn't coming to plead. She was coming to play a game he never knew had even begun, and she was holding all the cards. The penthouse felt less like a home, and more like a testament to a man's ego. Spanning the top 3 floors of the One Dalton building in Boston. It was a marvel of modern architecture and interior design, a palace in the sky that belonged to Damien Sterling. Tonight, however, it was more than just his residence. It was the stage for what he believed would be the defining moment of his new life. Damien adjusted the knot of his Tom Ford tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Boston sprawled beneath him, a glittering carpet of ambition and dreams. His own dreams, he mused, were finally within reach. He was a man who had everything wealth that could rival the GDP of a small nation. A reputation as a ruthless but brilliant venture capitalist, and the kind of good looks that made even the most hardened cynics swoon. Tonight he was adding another trophy to his collection, a fiancée. Not just any fiancée, but a woman who in his mind was the embodiment of perfection. Her name was Isabella Rossi, and she was everything his wife was not. Isabella was vivacious, spontaneous, and utterly captivated by him. She was a rising star in the art world, her paintings selling for astronomical sums, her beauty as breathtaking as her talent. He glanced at the small velvet box sitting on the polished obsidian of the grand piano. Inside rested a 7-carat flawless diamond ring, a bauble he had picked up without a second thought. The price tag as insignificant to him as a speck of dust. He imagined slipping it onto Isabella's delicate finger, her gasp of delight, the tears of joy welling in her emerald green eyes. A soft melodic hum reached his ears, and he turned to see Isabella emerging from the guest bedroom, a vision in a shimmering silver gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her fiery red hair was styled in loose waves that cascaded down her back, and her smile when it landed on him was pure, unadulterated adoration. "There you are," she purred, gliding towards him, her hips swaying with a dancer's grace. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me." Damien's own smile was a carefully constructed mask of affection. "Never, my love. I was just admiring the view." He gestured to the city below, but his eyes never left her face. "It's beautiful," she breathed, nestling into his side. "But not as beautiful as what I see right here." Her hand slid up his chest, her fingers toying with the buttons of his shirt. He chuckled a low, rumbling sound that was practiced and devoid of genuine warmth. "You always know just what to say." He led her towards the dining table, a magnificent creation of glass and chrome that was laden with an extravagant feast. A private chef was adding the finishing touches to a dish that smelled of truffle and saffron. They dined in a bubble of feigned intimacy, their conversation a carefully choreographed dance of flattery and flirtation. Damien spoke of his latest business conquests, of the ifers he was building and the rivals he was crushing. Isabella listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide with what he mistook for admiration. In reality, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, her every move a strategic play in a game he was oblivious to. Isabella was no fool. She knew about Damien's wife, of course. The whole of Boston's high society knew about Amelia Sterling, the quiet, unassuming woman who was rarely seen by her husband's side. They called her the ghost wife, a beautiful but fragile creature who was content to live in the shadows of her husband's immense success. But Isabella had a secret of her own, a secret that was far more potent than Damien's infidelity. She had known Amelia long before she had known Damien. They had been friends once in a life that seemed a world away from this opulent penthouse. It was a friendship that had been shattered by betrayal, a betrayal that had set Isabella on a path of revenge, a path that had led her directly to Damien Sterling. As the chef cleared their plates and a sommelier poured them glasses of vintage champagne, Isabella's heart began to race. The moment was approaching, the moment she had been working towards for so long. She watched as Damien rose from his seat, his expression shifting from one of casual charm to one of serious intent. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Isabella." He began, his voice a low, seductive murmur. "From the moment I met you, I knew my life would never be the same. You brought a light into my world that I never knew was missing." He was a master of words, a puppeteer who knew how to pull the right strings. But Isabella was no longer his puppet. She was the one holding the strings now. He reached for the velvet box on the piano, his movements slow and deliberate. He opened it, revealing the magnificent diamond that sparkled under the soft glow of the chandeliers. "Isabella Rossi," he said, his voice thick with a fabricated emotion. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He sank to one knee. A gesture of supplication that was as hollow as his promises. Isabella's breath hitched not from excitement, but from the sheer, unadulterated thrill of what was about to happen. This was it, the culmination of her meticulously crafted plan. She was about to give him her answer, an answer that would shatter his world in a way he could never have imagined. But before she could utter a single word, a sound pierced the carefully constructed silence of the penthouse. It was the soft, almost imperceptible chime of the private elevator announcing the arrival of an unexpected guest. Damien's head snapped up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He had given his staff strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed. Who would dare to interrupt his perfectly orchestrated proposal? The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, and a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman in a backless red gown that flowed around her like a river of molten lava. Her hair, a cascade of dark silken curls, was swept to one side, revealing a neck that was long and graceful. But it was her face that stole the breath from Damien's lungs. It was a face he knew better than his own, a face he had once loved, or at least a face he had once convinced himself he loved. It was Amelia, his wife, and she was pregnant. Her belly, round and full, was a stark contrast to the slinky, revealing dress she wore. It was a declaration, a statement that she was not the fragile, broken woman he had left behind. She stood there, poised and serene, her eyes the color of a stormy sea fixed on him. There was no trace of tears, no hint of hysteria. There was only a quiet, steely resolve that sent a shiver of unease down Damien's spine. Isabella, still on her knees, turned to look at the newcomer. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. The game had just begun, and the Queen had just made her move. The silence in the penthouse was a living entity, thick and suffocating. Damien, frozen in his kneeling position, felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. His mind, usually a sharp, well-oiled machine, sputtered and stalled. Amelia. Here. Now. It was a scenario so far beyond the realm of his calculated risks that he couldn't process it. He scrambled to his feet, the velvet box containing the 7-carat diamond slipping from his grasp. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, the sound echoing the sudden jarring halt of his plans. Amelia. He managed his voice, a strangled whisper. What are you doing here? Amelia's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. She took a step forward, the silk of her red gown whispering against the floor. Her gaze flickered from Damien's stunned face to Isabella, who was now rising gracefully, her expression a mask of feigned surprise. I could ask you the same thing, darling. Amelia replied, her voice as smooth and cool as the champagne in their glasses. She gestured towards the kneeling indentation Damien had left on the plush rug, then to the discarded ring box. A proposal, I presume. How predictable. The word spoken with such casual disdain was like a slap in the face. Damien flinched. He was a man accustomed to control, to orchestrating every detail of his life. To be called predictable, especially by the wife he had so thoroughly underestimated, was a blow to his ego. This isn't what it looks like. He stammered, the cliché tasting like ash in his mouth. Amelia raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Isn't it? You on one knee, offering a diamond to your mistress, while your pregnant wife is supposed to be tucked away ignorant and weeping into her pillow. It looks exactly like what it is, Damien. A pathetic B-list movie scene. Isabella, seeing her cue, stepped forward, her hand resting on Damien's arm in a gesture of proprietary support. Who do you think you are, barging in here like this? She demanded, her voice dripping with manufactured outrage. Amelia's gaze shifted to Isabella, and for the first time a flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. It wasn't anger, but something closer to pity. Oh, Isabella, she said, her tone laced with a weary sadness. Still playing the victim? I see. It's a role you've always excelled at. Isabella's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Amelia's smile sharpened, turning predatory. We have so much to catch up on. Don't we, old friend? The words hung in the air, charged with unspoken history. Damien looked back and forth between the two women, a dawning confusion on his face. Friend, you two know each other. Know each other. Amelia let out a soft, humorless laugh. That's one way of putting it. We were roommates in college. Best friends, even. Before Isabella discovered her talent for acquiring things that didn't belong to her. The revelation hit Damien like a physical blow. He stared at Isabella, who refused to meet his gaze. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he was about to make his wife, was a stranger, a liar. His carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, the foundations built on a web of deceit he hadn't even known existed. Is this true? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella finally looked at him, her emerald eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of fury. It's not what you think, Damien. She's twisting everything. She was always jealous of me, of my talent, of the attention I received. Was I? Amelia mused, taking another step closer. She was now standing directly in front of them, a formidable presence in her scarlet gown. Was I jealous when you stole my final project for our art history class, passing it off as your own, and winning the scholarship I had worked so hard for. Was I jealous when you started secretly dating my boyfriend, the first man I ever loved, and then flaunted your relationship in my face when I found out? Each question was a dagger piercing through the armor of Isabella's lies. She flinched, her composure cracking. "You're insane," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Amelia's smile widened. She reached into the small beaded clutch she was carrying and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, the edges yellowed with age. She unfolded it, revealing a sketch, a beautiful, intricate drawing of a weeping willow. "Recognize this, Isabella?" Amelia asked, her voice soft but menacing. "It was the preliminary sketch for my final project, the one you lost. I found it tucked away in one of my old sketchbooks. A sentimental fool, I know." She then turned her attention to Damien, her eyes locking with his. "And as for you, my darling husband," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you think you're the master of this game, don't you? The one pulling all the strings. But you're just a pawn. Damien. A pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. "You see, I knew all about your affair. I've known for months. I was the one who anonymously tipped off the paparazzi about your little romantic getaway to St. Bart's. I was the one who sent that ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne to your table at Père C, the one with the note that said, 'Enjoy your last supper.' And I was the one who made sure the private investigator you hired to follow me was feeding you false information, leading you to believe I was having a breakdown, when in reality I was gathering my own ammunition." Damien's face, already pale, turned ashen. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had been played, manipulated, and outmaneuvered by the one person he had dismissed as weak and insignificant. But why, he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. Why go to all this trouble? Amelia's expression softened the hard edges of her anger, giving way to a profound sadness. "Because you broke my heart, Damien. You took the love I gave you and you trampled on it. You humiliated me. You disrespected me. And you underestimated me." And that, she said, her voice regaining its steely edge, was your biggest mistake. She then turned to Isabella, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "And as for you, you snake, you thought you could slither your way into my life, take what was mine, and get away with it. But you forgot one thing. I'm not the same naive, trusting girl you knew in college. I'm a woman who has been to hell and back, and I've learned how to fight fire with fire." With that, she reached into her clutch again and pulled out another item. This time it was not a piece of paper. It was a small silver USB drive. "This," she said, holding it up for them to see, "is my masterpiece. It's a collection of every email, every text message, every recorded phone call between the two of you for the past 6 months. It's a detailed account of your affair, your lies, and your plans to ruin me. And I've already sent a copy to every major news outlet in the country, as well as to the board of directors of your company." The color drained from Damien's face. His company, his empire, his entire life was built on a carefully crafted image of power and control. An image that was about to be shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Isabella, a woman he had been about to propose to just moments before, and saw her not as a lover, but as a liability, a co-conspirator in his own downfall. The penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on him. The city lights outside, once a testament to his ambition, now seemed to mock him a glittering reminder of everything he was about to lose. Amelia watched him, her expression unreadable. She had him exactly where she wanted him, broken, exposed, and utterly at her mercy. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just getting interesting. The immediate aftermath of Amelia's bombshell was a chaotic symphony of emotions. Damien, for the first time in his life, was speechless. He stared at the USB drive in Amelia's hand as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. His mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations, was a blank slate of pure, unadulterated panic. Isabella, on the other hand, reacted with the feral desperation of a cornered animal. "You're bluffing!" She hissed, her voice a mixture of fear and fury. "You wouldn't dare!" Amelia's lips curved into a chilling smile. "Try me," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "The press will have a field day with this. Millionaire mogul's torrid affair, with scheming artist exposed by pregnant wife. It has a certain ring to it, don't you think?" She then turned her attention back to Damien, her eyes narrowing. "And the board of directors at Sterling Industries. They're not going to be too pleased about this, are they? Especially when they find out you've been using company funds to finance your little love nest with Isabella." This was a new revelation, a fresh twist of the knife that sent another jolt of terror through Damien. He had been careless, so sure of his own invincibility that he hadn't bothered to cover his tracks. He had paid for the penthouse, the lavish gifts, the extravagant trips, all with a corporate credit card, a drop in the ocean of his company's vast wealth. But now that drop was about to become a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in a sea of scandal and financial ruin. How did you know about that?" He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Amelia's smile widened. "You're not the only one with connections, Damien. I may have been a ghost wife, but I was never a fool. I have friends in places you wouldn't even dream of, friends who are more than happy to help a woman who has been wronged." She was referring to her father, a man Damien had always dismissed as a quiet, unassuming academic. What Damien didn't know was that Amelia's father was a retired forensic accountant, a man who could unravel a complex web of financial deceit with the same ease that others read a newspaper. He had been the one to uncover Damien's misuse of company funds, providing Amelia with the ammunition she needed to bring her husband's empire crumbling down. The weight of it all was too much for Damien. He stumbled backwards, collapsing onto the plush sofa, his head in his hands. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were being exposed one by one with brutal efficiency. Isabella, seeing her dreams of a life of luxury and power slipping through her fingers, turned on him, her voice laced with venom. "This is all your fault," she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade of sophistication shattering into a million pieces. "You were supposed to be smart, powerful. You were supposed to protect me, protect you." Damien looked up, his eyes filled with a newfound clarity. He saw her for what she truly was, a parasite, a beautiful, venomous creature who had latched onto him for his wealth and status. "You're the one who started this. You and your petty high school vendetta against Amelia." "It wasn't petty. Isabella," screamed, her voice raw with a rage that had been simmering for years. "She took everything from me. The scholarship, the man I loved. She deserved to suffer." "The man you loved?" Amelia interjected, her voice laced with a weary sadness. "You mean David? The boy who broke up with you 2 months after you started dating, because he couldn't stand your constant need for drama and attention. The boy who came to me in tears, apologizing for ever having hurt me. This was a truth that Isabella had buried deep, a truth that she had refused to acknowledge for over a decade. But now, in the harsh light of Amelia's revelations, it was impossible to ignore. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of utter despair. She sank to the floor, her silver gown pooling around her like a puddle of melted dreams. She was defeated, exposed, her carefully crafted world in ruins. Amelia watched the scene unfold with a sense of detached satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when the two people who had hurt her the most were finally forced to confront the consequences of their actions. But her victory was bittersweet. As she looked at the broken man on the sofa and the weeping woman on the floor, she felt not a surge of triumph, but a pang of emptiness. This was not the life she had envisioned for herself. She had wanted love, a family, a home filled with warmth and laughter. Instead, she had a penthouse filled with the wreckage of broken promises and shattered dreams. She took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. This was not just about revenge anymore. This was about her future, about the future of her child. She turned to Damien, her voice now devoid of anger, replaced by a cool, businesslike tone. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her words sharp and precise. "You are going to issue a public statement taking full responsibility for the affair. You will not mention Isabella by name. You will simply state that you made a grave error in judgment, and that you are committed to making amends." She then turned to Isabella. "You," she said, her voice hardening, "are going to disappear. You will leave Boston. You will change your name. And you will never contact me or Damien again. If I so much as hear a whisper of your name in this city, I will release the rest of the information I have on you. And believe me," she added, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light, "what I've revealed tonight is just the tip of the iceberg." Isabella, her face streaked with tears, could only nod in mute acceptance. She had no choice. Amelia had her cornered, and she knew it. Finally, Amelia turned back to Damien. "As for us," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, "we are going to get a divorce. But it will be a quiet, amicable divorce. No drama, no scandal. We will present a united front to the public for the sake of our child." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And in return for your cooperation," she continued, "I will not release the information about your misuse of company funds to the authorities. I will give you a chance to salvage what's left of your company, of your life." It was an offer of an alliance, a truce in a war that had left them all scarred. It was a lifeline, a chance for redemption, and Damien, in his state of utter desperation, grasped it with both hands. "I'll do it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever you want." Amelia nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Good," she said. "I'm glad we understand each other." With that, she turned and walked towards the elevator, her red gown flowing behind her like a banner of victory. She had come to the penthouse as a victim, a woman scorned. She was leaving as a queen, the master of her own destiny. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Damien and Isabella alone in the wreckage of their affair. The penthouse, once a symbol of their forbidden love, was now a tomb, a monument to their shared downfall. The game was over, and they had both lost. Or so they thought. The true game, the one for power, for survival, and for the future of the Sterling legacy, had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of carefully managed chaos. True to her word, Amelia orchestrated the narrative with the precision of a seasoned military strategist. Damien, stripped of his usual arrogance, became a surprisingly pliant puppet. He issued a public statement, a masterpiece of corporate contrition, admitting to an unspecified personal failing and vowing to focus on his family and his company. The media, hungry for a villain, was momentarily placated, their attention diverted by the carefully worded apology. Isabella, as promised, vanished. One day she was the talk of the Boston art scene. The next she was gone, her gallery representation rescinded, her social media accounts deleted. It was as if she had never existed. Amelia, through her discreet but powerful connections, had ensured her erasure was swift and absolute. The divorce proceedings were initiated, handled by a team of high-powered lawyers who operated under a strict non-disclosure agreement. The terms were generous, but with a crucial clause: Amelia would retain a significant non-voting stake in Sterling Industries, a golden handcuff that kept Damien tethered to her, a constant reminder of her power. But behind this facade of controlled demolition, a new, more complex game was unfolding. Amelia, having tasted power, found that it suited her. She had spent years in Damien's shadow, her own considerable intellect and business acumen dismissed and ignored. Now she was stepping into the light, not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a formidable player in her own right. She began to quietly cultivate relationships with key members of the Sterling Industries board, the very people she had threatened to expose. She didn't use blackmail or coercion. Instead, she used her knowledge, her sharp insights into the market, and her understanding of the company's weaknesses that Damien, in his hubris, had overlooked. She met with them for discreet lunches at the Capitol Grill, a world away from the flashy, trendy restaurants Damien frequented. She spoke their language, the language of profit margins, of market trends, of long-term growth. She presented them with a vision for the future of Sterling Industries, a vision that was more stable, more sustainable, and ultimately more profitable than Damien's high-risk, high-reward approach. One of her key allies was a man named Arthur Vance, the oldest and most respected member of the board. He had been a friend of Damien's father, and had always been wary of Damien's reckless ambition. He saw in Amelia a reflection of her father-in-law's prudence and foresight. "Your husband is a brilliant but undisciplined force of nature," Arthur told her during one of their lunches, his shrewd eyes studying her over the rim of his water glass. "He builds empires on foundations of sand. You, on the other hand, understand the importance of bedrock." Amelia, her baby bump now more pronounced under a chic, tailored dress, simply smiled. "I believe in building things that last, Arthur. For the sake of my child, and for the sake of the legacy that my child will one day inherit." It was a masterstroke, framing her ambition not as a power grab, but as a mother's desire to protect her child's future. It was a narrative that the old guard, family-oriented members of the board could understand and support. Damien, meanwhile, was adrift in a sea of his own making. The affair had been a symptom of a deeper malaise, a boredom with his own success, a need for constant stimulation and validation. Now, stripped of his mistress and under the watchful eye of his estranged wife, he felt a sense of emptiness that his vast wealth could not fill. He tried to throw himself back into his work, but the fire was gone. His usual ruthlessness was tempered by a newfound caution, a fear of making another misstep that would give Amelia more leverage. He found himself second-guessing his own decisions, his instincts blunted by the knowledge that he was no longer the sole master of his universe. He watched from the sidelines as Amelia's influence grew, a silent, creeping power that was slowly but surely reshaping the company he had built. He saw the subtle shifts in the board's allegiance, the way they now deferred to her judgment, the way they sought her counsel on matters that had once been his exclusive domain. He felt a grudging respect for her, a respect that was tinged with a bitter resentment. She had outplayed him, outmaneuvered him at every turn. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married had revealed herself to be a queen in disguise, a political operator of the highest order. The tension between them came to a head during a tense board meeting to discuss a major acquisition. Damien was advocating for a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a bold, aggressive move that was typical of his style. Amelia, however, argued for a more strategic approach, a partnership rather than a conquest. A hostile takeover will create a toxic work environment and alienate their top talent. She argued, her voice calm and measured, but with an underlying authority that commanded attention. A strategic alliance, on the other hand, will allow us to leverage their innovation while maintaining our own corporate culture. It's a win-win, not a zero-sum game. Her argument was logical, well-researched, and ultimately more persuasive. The board, led by Arthur Vance, voted in her favor, leaving Damien isolated and defeated. That evening he found her in the library of their sprawling mansion, the one part of the house they still shared a neutral territory in their Cold War. She was reading a book on corporate governance, a glass of sparkling water on the table beside her. "You've been busy," he said, his voice laced with a sarcasm that did little to hide his frustration. Amelia looked up, her expression unreadable. "I'm just trying to protect my investment," she replied, her voice cool and even. "Your investment?" he scoffed. "You mean my company. Our company." "Damien," she corrected him gently. "Or have you forgotten the terms of our agreement?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation. "What do you want, Amelia? What's your end game here? You have the money. You have your freedom. Why are you still here meddling in my business?" She closed her book, her gaze meeting his. "Because it's not just about the money, Damien. It's about respect. It's about proving to you and to myself that I am more than just the woman you cheated on. I am a force to be reckoned with." She rose from her chair, her pregnant belly a prominent silhouette against the firelight. And besides, she added a faint, almost imperceptible smile, playing on her lips. "I'm not done with you yet. The game is far from over." She left him then alone in the library, with the ghosts of his past mistakes, and the unsettling realization that his future was no longer his own. He was a king in a gilded cage, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by the very woman he had tried to cast aside. And as he watched her go, he felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stirring within him. It wasn't just respect or resentment. It was fear. Fear of the woman his wife had become, and fear of what she was capable of. The backless red gown had been a declaration of war, but her quiet, calculated rise to power was proving to be far more devastating than any single dramatic confrontation. Life settled into a strange, tense rhythm. The divorce was finalized, a quiet affair that barely made a ripple in the society pages, a testament to Amelia's masterful control of the narrative. She moved out of the marital mansion and into a chic, modern brownstone in Beacon Hill, a home that was all her own, paid for, with the generous settlement from the divorce. But her connection to Sterling Industries remained a constant, looming presence in Damien's life. She attended board meetings via video conference, her image projected onto a large screen, a virtual queen overseeing her domain. Her contributions were always sharp, insightful, and much to Damien's chagrin, usually right. The company under her stabilizing influence was thriving, its stock price climbing to new heights. Damien, however, was a man adrift. He had lost his edge, his appetite for the ruthless, high-stakes game of corporate warfare. He found himself going through the motions, his days a monotonous cycle of meetings and paperwork. He was a king in name, only his power checked at every turn by the woman he had once dismissed as a fragile, insignificant creature. And then a new player entered the game, a ghost from a past Damien had tried to bury. It started with a series of anonymous emails sent to his private account. They were cryptic at first, just a single word or a phrase that seemed to have no meaning. But then they became more specific, referencing deals and conversations that had taken place years ago, details that only a handful of people would know. Damien initially dismissed them as a prank, a disgruntled former employee trying to rattle his cage. But then an email arrived that made his blood run cold. It contained a single attachment, a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, her face partially obscured by shadows, but her eyes, wide and fearful, were unmistakable. It was a face he had tried to forget, a face that haunted his nightmares. The woman's name was Chloe, and she had been his assistant a decade ago, back when Sterling Industries was just a fledgling startup. She had been bright, ambitious, and utterly devoted to him. And he, in his arrogance and recklessness, had exploited that devotion, luring her into an affair that had ended in tragedy. Chloe had become pregnant, and in a moment of panic, Damien had pressured her to have an abortion, threatening to ruin her career if she refused. Devastated and alone, Chloe had quit her job and disappeared. A few months later, Damien had received a letter from her parents, informing him that she had taken her own life. It was a secret he had carried for 10 years, a dark, ugly stain on his soul. He had paid her parents a substantial sum of money to ensure their silence a transaction that he had disguised as a charitable donation. He had convinced himself that he had buried the past, that it could never come back to haunt him. But now it was clear that someone else knew. Someone who was using that knowledge to torment him, to unravel the carefully constructed facade of his life. His first suspect was Isabella. He imagined her bitter and vengeful digging into his past, looking for a weapon to use against him. But he quickly dismissed the idea. Isabella was a narcissist, not a strategist. This was too subtle, too calculated for her. His next thought inevitably was Amelia. Had she, in her quest for revenge, uncovered this dark secret from his past? It was a chilling thought, but it didn't quite fit. Amelia was playing a long game, a game for power and control. This felt different, more personal, more sadistic. The emails continued, each one more menacing than the last. They contained excerpts from Chloe's diary passages that spoke of her love for Damien, her heartbreak and her despair. They were intimate, personal details that only Chloe herself could have known. Damien was coming undone. He became paranoid, suspicious of everyone around him. He had his office swept for bugs, his computer scrubbed by cybersecurity experts. But the emails kept coming, a relentless psychological torture that was pushing him to the brink of a breakdown. He finally confided in Arthur Vance, the one person he felt he could trust. He told him everything: the affair with Chloe, the pregnancy, the suicide. He laid bare the ugliest chapter of his life, a confession that left him feeling raw and exposed. Arthur listened in silence, his expression grim. When Damien was finished, the old man sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "I had hoped the rumors weren't true," he said, his voice heavy with a weary sadness. "Rumors?" Damien asked, his heart sinking. "There were whispers back then," Arthur admitted. "Nothing concrete, just office gossip. But it was enough to make your father worry. He was the one who insisted on bringing me onto the board to keep an eye on you." This was another revelation that shook Damien to his core. His own father had not trusted him, had seen the darkness lurking beneath the surface of his ambition. "I think I know who's behind this," Arthur said, his voice low and serious. "And it's not who you think." He then told Damien a story that made the blood drain from his face. Chloe had a brother, a younger brother who had idolized her. His name was Ethan, and he had been devastated by his sister's death. He had never believed the story of her suicide, had always suspected that Damien was somehow responsible. Ethan, it turned out, was a tech prodigy, a brilliant but troubled young man who had spent the last decade honing his skills as a hacker, nursing a burning desire for revenge. He had been a ghost watching Damien from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "He's not after your money," Damien Arthur warned. "He's not after your company. He wants to destroy you, to dismantle your life, piece by piece, just as you dismantled his." The realization hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. He was not being blackmailed. He was being hunted. And his hunter was not just a disgruntled ex-lover or a vengeful ex-wife. He was a man with nothing to lose, a man who was driven by a grief that had festered into a dangerous, all-consuming obsession. The game had changed once again. It was no longer a battle for control of a corporation. It was a fight for his very survival. And in a strange, ironic twist of fate, the one person who might be able to help him, the one person with the strategic mind and the ruthless cunning to match Ethan's, was the woman he had so carelessly wronged. He had to go to Amelia. He had to confess everything, to lay bare all his secrets, and to beg for her help. It was a humiliating prospect, a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had defined their relationship. But he had no other choice. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and Amelia was his only hope of waking up. The question was, would she help the man who had shattered her world, or would she watch with a cold, detached satisfaction as he was consumed by the ghosts of his past? The drive to Amelia's Beacon Hill brownstone was the longest journey of Damien's life. Each red light, each traffic jam, felt like a personal affront, a delay in the inevitable, humiliating reckoning that awaited him. He rehearsed his confession over and over in his mind, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. He found her in her garden, a small, beautifully manicured oasis of green in the heart of the city. She was kneeling on a cushioned mat, tending to a bed of roses, her pregnant form a picture of serene domesticity. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that was raging inside him. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Damien," she said, her voice cool and guarded. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He launched into his confession, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of fear and desperation. He told her everything about Chloe, about the pregnancy, about the suicide, about the emails, about Ethan. He held nothing back, laying bare the full, ugly extent of his past transgressions. Amelia listened in silence, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. She simply let him speak her gaze, never leaving his face. When he was finally finished, the silence that followed was heavy and profound. He expected an outburst, a tirade of condemnation. He expected to see disgust, revulsion, a final definitive rejection. What he saw instead was a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, a complex emotion that was somewhere between pity and a cold, calculating assessment of the situation. So she said finally, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion. The great Damien Sterling, brought to his knees by the ghost of a dead girl and her vengeful brother. Her words were a slap in the face, but he didn't flinch. He deserved it. He deserved all of it. "I need your help, Amelia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do. He's going to destroy me." She rose to her feet, brushing the soil from her hands. She walked to a small wrought-iron table and poured herself a glass of water. She took a long, slow sip, her mind clearly working, processing the information, analyzing the angles. "And why should I help you?" she asked, her back still to him. "You, the man who cheated on me, who lied to me, who was about to replace me with my childhood nemesis. You, the man who I now discover is responsible for the death of a young woman who was carrying his child. Give me one good reason why I should lift a finger to save you from the fate you so richly deserve." It was the question he had been dreading, the question for which he had no answer. He couldn't appeal to her love or her loyalty or her sense of shared history. He had destroyed all of that. So he appealed to the one thing they still had in common, their child. "Do it for our son," he said, his voice thick with a genuine, unfeigned emotion. "He doesn't deserve to have a father who is a pariah, a man whose name is synonymous with scandal and death. He deserves a father. He can be proud of a father who has atoned for his sins." He saw her shoulders tense, the first sign of a crack in her icy composure. She turned to face him, her eyes for the first time betraying a hint of the turmoil that was raging within her. "Don't you dare use our child as a bargaining chip," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "I'm telling you the truth. I want to be a better man, Amelia. For him. For you." The last two words slipped out unbidden, a whisper of a truth he hadn't even acknowledged to himself until that moment. In the midst of his downfall, in the face of his own mortality, he had come to realize what he had lost. He had lost not just a wife, but a partner, a confidant, a woman whose strength and intelligence he had so foolishly underestimated. Amelia's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the genuine remorse. She saw a man who had been stripped of his arrogance, his pride, his carefully constructed defenses. She saw a man who was broken, and in that brokenness she saw an opportunity. "This Ethan," she said, her voice shifting to a more businesslike tone. "He's a hacker, you said?" Damien nodded. "One of the best, according to Arthur. And he's using his sister's diary as his primary weapon." "Yes. He's releasing it in pieces, tormenting me with it." Amelia was silent for a moment, her mind racing. A diary is a narrative she mused more to herself than to him, and a narrative can be rewritten. A slow, cunning smile spread across her face, a smile that sent a shiver of both fear and hope down Damien's spine. It was the smile of a grand master who sees the entire chessboard, who anticipates every move, who knows how to turn a losing position into a stunning, unexpected victory. "All right, Damien," she said, her voice now firm and decisive. "I'll help you, but not for your sake and not even for our son's sake. I'll help you because this is a game I find interesting. And it's a game I intend to win." She extended her hand, not as a wife, not as a lover, but as a business partner. "We have an alliance," she said, her eyes locking with his. "An unholy alliance, perhaps, but an alliance nonetheless." and here are my terms. The terms were brutal. She demanded full voting control of Sterling Industries. She demanded that he step down as CEO, remaining on as a figurehead, a chairman with no real power. She demanded that he place a significant portion of his personal wealth into a trust for their son, a trust that she alone would control. It was a complete and utter surrender, a ceding of his entire empire to her. But he didn't hesitate. He had no other choice. "Done," he said, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, her hand surprisingly warm. "Good," she said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Now tell me everything you know about Ethan, his habits, his weaknesses, his digital footprint. We're going to hunt the hunter. We're going to find him. We're going to confront him. And we're going to give him a new story to tell. A story of his sister's tragic, accidental death. A story that will absolve you, and a story that he will have no choice but to believe." It was an audacious, breathtakingly ruthless plan. It was a plan that involved deception, manipulation, and the weaponization of a dead woman's memory. It was a plan that was morally bankrupt, and yet in its sheer, cold-blooded brilliance, it was Damien's only hope. He had come to her as a penitent begging for forgiveness. He was leaving as a co-conspirator, a partner in a scheme that was darker and more twisted than anything he could have ever conceived on his own. He had unleashed a force he could not control, a queen who was not content with just a piece of the kingdom, but who wanted the entire empire. And as he walked away from her Beacon Hill brownstone, he knew that he had just made a deal with the devil. But he also knew that for the first time in a long time, he had a fighting chance. The game was afoot, and he and Amelia, the most unlikely of allies, were about to make their first move. The story of Damien and Amelia is a twisted tale of love betrayal and the intoxicating allure of power. It's a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. But their story is far from over. The unholy alliance they have forged is as fragile as it is formidable, and the game they are about to play with a grief-stricken, vengeful hacker is one with no rules and no guarantees. What do you think will happen next? Will Amelia's ruthless plan succeed? Or will Ethan the ghost in the machine prove to be a more formidable adversary than they could ever have imagined? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you want to find out what happens next in this saga of wealth, power, and revenge, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more Millionaire drama. You won't want to miss the next chapter.